Dragon. The word has a myriad of interpretations in Vana'diel, from the colossal worms of legend to shadow dragons conjured through dark sorcery. Dragons have historically been among the greatest and most powerful beings in the world, wielding fang, claw, magic and searing breath with devastating power. Very few mortals will encounter these majestic beasts and live to tell the tale. Actually, the use of the term beast is something of a misnomer, as that term implies that the being is of lesser sophistication, intellect, and more prone to savagery. While shadow dragons and dark wyverns certainly make no illusions of their nature as creatures of evil intent, there exists within each dragon the capacity for good and evil, for light and darkness. They are much akin to the enlightened races of Vana'diel in this regard, as such potential exists within the hearts and minds of the next Hume, Elvan, Mithra, or otherwise. The Elvan kingdom of Sandoria has had a long and often violent history with dragons, as the Ronfa and Norvalan regions of their land were beset with worms, dragons who saw the forests as great places to establish their homes. Conflict between the Elvan and the worms felled Sandorian armies by the score, and also killed great worms who had lived for centuries. Being a deeply religious nation at heart, a group of brave knights took the words of their goddess Altana to heart, and sought to find the light in dragons. These knights did not seek to indiscriminately slay dragons like so many others before them, but instead opted to forge spiritual pacts with the younger dragons, so that they may both better develop alongside each other. These knights became the first Dragoons. What exactly does being a Dragoon entail though? Dragoons are knights with powers gained from a spiritual link to a wyvern, the young form of a worm. While suited for combat against most foes, a Dragoon and their wyvern are first and foremost dedicated to the slaying of dark dragons, dragons beyond recourse. A Dragoon's abilities make such feats possible. They have an innately higher degree of physical strength, stamina, and vitality than most others, a benefit of having their wyvern's life force empower them. It is through this connection that Dragoons also gain an incredible acrobatic ability, which manifests in their signature jump attacks, where they leap high into the sky before coming crashing down on their opponents, using the momentum and their lances to pierce the armor and hides of even the toughest foes. The emergence of the Dragoons was a groundbreaking moment in Sandorian history, and many impressionable young knights sought to join their ranks, usually to no avail however, as wyverns would only typically form a connection with the righteous, not with those who merely sought power for its own sake. Dragoons were therefore a rare sight, but the few there were profoundly shaped the course of Sandorian history. Among the most notable of these was Ch.2. Ch.2 was a true prodigy. Starting life in the Sandorian royal court as a page to King Ramper himself, he became the youngest person in history to form a spiritual link with a wyvern, and his powers as a Dragoon emerged. At the tender age of only 17, Ch.2 was conferred the title of Master Dragoon. Only a year later, he was then appointed as the General of the Royal Knights, setting yet another record, becoming the youngest general in Sandorian history. At the command of his king, Ch.2 and his knights brought a final end to a long-lasting civil war and helped reunify the fragmented kingdom. Only a few years later, Ch.2 vanished while on an overseas expedition, and this is where controversy rears its head. Rumours ran rampant among the ranks and among the king's own subjects that Ch.2 had been exiled from the kingdom and assassinated on the king's orders. The conspiracy theory goes that the king wanted Ch.2 disposed of because he was gaining far too much popularity from the ranks and from the common folk. People who might have disagreed with the king's actions in the civil war and sought to put a new monarch on the throne, a monarch proven righteous in heart by his status as a Dragoon. Court intrigue was certainly nothing new to the royal household, but these rumours persisted and plagued the king until his own death. Ch.2's body was never found, neither was his wyvern. Because he was the only Dragoon of his time, and since he had no others to train as his successors, Ch.2 became known as the Last Dragoon. Over a century has passed between Ch.2's time and the present. when an adventurer came to Sandoria on one fateful day. After overhearing a very interesting conversation on the docks of Sandoria, the adventurer comes to the dungeons beneath the royal household, where a man called Ch.2, a dragoon, has apparently been incarcerated. When they ask for him, the jailers say that Ch.2 is already dead, killed by his own cellmate, a beastmaster who somehow managed to call a monster and stage a jailbreak. Another inmate who witnessed what happened then speaks up through the bars of his own cell. Apparently, Rahal, the general of the Royal Knights, had been paying frequent visits to Ch.2. According to the prisoner, likely informed by the late Ch.2 himself, Rahal and Ch.2 had been friends for a very long time, before the latter was incarcerated by the former out of jealousy when Ch.2 became a dragoon. Feeling a little bit lost in all of this drama, the adventure is directed to the cathedral, where an archaeologist can inform them better. When they arrive at the cathedral, the adventurer asks a student by the name of Morgine about the head archaeologist. Just as the archaeologist arrives and begins his spiel on the nature of dragons, he is then followed into the room by Rahal, the same Rahal the adventurer heard referred to earlier on. Rahal asks the archaeologist if they have seen anyone suspicious loitering around the cathedral. He clearly seems unsettled by something, but says very little on the matter, and leaves almost as quickly as he arrived. The archaeologist then informs the adventurer that a wyvern's egg can be found in the depths of the maze of Shakrami. He bids the adventurer find and protect the egg before it can be hunted down by overzealous dragon slayers. A few days later, the adventurer returns to Sandoria, having found the wyvern's egg, only to find that the archaeologist is nowhere to be found. Morgine and the adventurer's conversation is cut short by a man called Ch.2, who claims to be another student of the archaeologist. Ch.2 notices that the adventurer has a wyvern egg, and tells him he knows of a method for hatching it. Upon agreeing to his proposal, Ch.2 tells the adventurer to meet them at the end of Drogoraga's Spine in the Meripatald Mountains, directly on the Crystal Line. The adventurer feels a little uneasy about the suddenness of the whole thing, but curiosity gets the better of them. After another lengthy trip across the land, the two meet up at the edge of the spine. The adventurer places the egg in a crevice in the structure, and an infant wyvern emerges, the first to fly free in years. The adventurer notes that the wyvern has an odd colour, a mixture of blues and whites. It certainly does not look evil. Then, before they can even react, Ch.2 draws his sword and strikes the newborn wyvern. The adventurer moves to attack, but they are stopped when Ch.2 threatens to kill the defenseless wyvern. Rahal then runs onto the scene and calls Ch.2 Ch.2. Remembering that name from a conversation only a few days prior, what has happened hits the adventurer like an anvil. Their sense of foreboding was correct, it seems. Ch.2 was an alias used by Ch.2, a dragoon fallen from grace, sealed away in the dungeons by the royal knights at Rahal's order. As it turns out, Ch.2's escape was down to sheer luck, as the beastmaster he was celled with ended up crushing themselves under the rubble of the cell wall. It is also likely that Ch.2 was responsible for the disappearance of the archaeologist, who may have recognized him and raised the alarm. Ch.2 says that he plans to use the blood extracted for the infant wyvern to turn himself into a full dragon before vanishing. Rahal explains that part of the tale the adventurer heard earlier is true, but it's not the entire truth. Ch.2 was an old friend of his who became a dragoon, but the news of him doing so was suppressed when the wyvern he made a pact with had an unholy symbol on it. Fearful of what could happen if things escalated further, Rahal indeed did have Ch.2 imprisoned and his powers as a dragoon bound through white magic. The damage had been done though. Ch.2's spirit had been dominated by his wyvern, which had by then fully integrated itself with his mind, body and soul. Knowing that Ch.2's actions against the newborn wyvern mean it stands a solid chance of likewise developing into an evil dragon, Rahal prepares to finish it off. But as he looks down at the wyvern, he cannot bring himself to do it. It has not had a chance to live, and he knows that taking a life in this manner is wrong, no matter how much he may want to justify it. Rahal says that they must bring the Wyvern back to Sandoria for treatment, as they may need its help in tracking down Kaironus before he can enact his plan. As they race back to Sandoria on Chocobo back, Rahal tells the adventurer the full truth of what happened to Kaironus. The adventurer learns that both Rahal and Kaironus served in the Young Griffins in the Crystal War, a minor branch of the Royal Army dedicated to training young knights. This is where they met and served with distinction under the command of the prodigy and future hero of the kingdom, Exenmeal. Under his direction, the Young Griffins played a crucial part in several key battles in the Sandorian theatre, outsmarting and defeating foes leagues ahead of themselves, even claiming the life of the infamous Orc warlord Kingslayer Dogdeg. Although a talented knight in his own regard, Kaironus also served alongside his younger brother Ch.2, and together the two formed the backbone of the Young Griffins, both embodying the ideal of knighthood through their valour, strength and dedication. However, in the line of duty fulfilling tasks well beyond their scope and age, tragedy struck. While on a mission tracking down a behemoth the Orcish host was preparing to use in battle, Ch.2 was severely wounded. Kaironus dragged his barely conscious brother the entire length of the Pashal marshlands, desperately crying for help all the while. Ch.2's wounds were too extensive though, and he died after doing his sworn duty one final time. Seeing his own younger brother die right in front of him emotionally destroyed Kaironus, and despite seeing the Crystal War to its end, the effect this tragedy had on him was evident even at the time. Rahal tells the adventurer that after the Crystal War, Kaironus vanished from the kingdom, but not before telling him that he would seek the powers of the Dragoons of legend, to better protect the people he still loved. Evidently, he was successful in becoming a Dragoon, but his tormented heart and spirit became a well of dark power for his wyvern to feed on, and it began eating away at what remained of his being. Heartbroken to see what had become of his old friend, Rahal tracked Kaironus down and sealed him away, hoping that he could reverse the damage. His efforts were in vain though, and left with no other option, Rahal did all he could to conceal the truth for the sake of his old friend, and for the legacy of the last Dragoon. Once seeing to the wyvern's immediate injuries, the duo tracked down Kaironus to the Gelsper outpost. Rahal approaches Kaironus only to be struck down. Out of commission and unable to pursue him further, Rahal bids the adventurer to confront Kaironus and subdue him. Cornered into an enclosure, Kaironus realizes he has nowhere else to run, and fully surrenders himself to the spirit of his wyvern, becoming a dark dragon himself. The adventurer draws their weapon and charges the Fallen Dragoon. After being defeated in a pitched battle, Kaironus keels over, barely able to move. Rahal rushes over to his friend and tries to administer a remedy, but to no avail. Accepting his imminent death, Kaironus resolves to die with honour by taking the Dark Dragon's spirit with him. Looking down at him in his final moments, the adventurer realises that Kaironus became a Dragoon with righteous intentions to protect others, but his experiences left him vulnerable to being set on a dark path with the power he gained. A sad ending to a good man. Before he passes, Kaironus asks Rahal what will happen to the young wyvern. Rahal explains that he is bound by his duties as a dragon slayer to kill dark dragons, and that he still fears that the one Kaironus attacked will lead to another Dragoon becoming just like him. But Kaironus pleads with Rahal to spare the wyvern's life before finally fading away. Rahal then looks up to find the wyvern flying over to the adventurer, and in a surge of panic he draws his sword. But a Holy Crest appears on the wyvern. Seeing the valour and pure intentions of the adventurer, the wyvern binds its spirit to theirs. Smiling, Rahal sheaths his sword, content in the knowledge that a true Dragoon walks Vana'diel again. Over the next year, the Dragoon and their wyvern form a strong partnership, both growing exceptionally strong through their connection. When the Dragoon returns to Sandoria, they become wrapped up in a matter which ends up concerning them greatly. Someone has been tracking down the armour of Aplacion, the last Dragoon, for reasons unknown, and using any means necessary to obtain it. The Dragoon manages to rescue part of the armour, but the fact that someone is actively pursuing it worries them. They decide to visit Rahal and see if he can shed any light on the situation. Arriving at the royal household at the quarters of the Royal Knights, the Dragoon finds Rahal in a state of considerable concern. Apparently, the Royal Knights have been subject to attacks from an unknown assailant recently. These are not attacks from a hired ninja or the work of temporary assassins frequently seen in the Crystal War. This is someone with a vendetta against the Royal Knights, someone who knows them well. Rahal says that rumours between the knights point to the culprit being none other than Aplacion himself, and that the spirit of the last Dragoon has returned to haunt and wreak vengeance on the kingdom that betrayed him. Rahal then tells the Dragoon the controversy surrounding the disappearance of Aplacion, that upon the resolution of the Sandorian Civil War, King Romper ordered Aplacion on an overseas expedition to the outland continents. Such a venture served no strategic value and is widely believed to have just been an excuse to get rid of the hero of the kingdom. Word of this conspiracy has never gone away, and if it was somehow proven true, it could cause a major scandal in the royal household, potentially even leading to the outbreak of more civil unrest. Rahal does not believe the conspiracy though, but he has no evidence to disprove it either. Rahal asks the Dragoon to take up the investigation and finally get to the truth of the matter. Like many in the kingdom, he has great admiration for the legacy of Aplacion, so much so that he did all he could to bury Kairodus's existence as a fallen Dragoon. Just then, as the two discuss the matter, a suit of armour next to them animates itself to life. Initially stunned at what he's seeing, Rahal composes himself, draws his sword and strikes down the armour. Noting that it is empty, he hears calls from his subordinates who are paralysed in terror as more suits move to attack. In a fit of hysteria, one of the knights cries out that this must be the work of Aplacion's ghost, as Rahal rushes past and makes quick work of the empty shells. The fear among the knights is evident to the Dragoon, enough that Rahal is determined from causing the panic to spread beyond the castle grounds. The Dragoon then explains that they recently saved a piece of Aplacion's armour from theft from the Bruguer Consortium. Agreeing that this is a good place to begin their investigation, Rahal sends the Dragoon on their way. The Dragoon tells Bruguer, the owner of the Bruguer Consortium, that the thief had been hired by someone else, and that this same person is also likely responsible for the attacks on the Royal Knights. Bruguer proposes a plan to lure the criminal out into the open by acquiring another part of Aplacion's armour before they do. Bruguer tells the Dragoon that the helm of Aplacion is said to be somewhere deep in the Kufdal tunnel, and given that Aplacion was sent on an expedition to the Outlands, this certainly seems viable. Although the Dragoon does find a coffer in the Kufdal tunnel, there is no helm in it, only a letter bearing a threatening message. The helm of the last Dragoon is already in my possession. I will lay bare the inadequacies of the Royal Knights' current leadership and their inability to defend Sandoria. They were too late. But in the eyes of the Dragoon, this greatly narrows down the list of suspects, so they take the letter to the Royal Knight's current leadership as the letter implied, Rahal, who thinks he recognises the handwriting but directs the Dragoon to his mentor Balasiel for a second confirmation. Upon seeing the letter, Balasiel indeed recognises the handwriting. It is that of Anselain Foulat, the former second-in-command of the Royal Knights. Anselain was a skilled knight, and if that were his only attributes, Balasiel would have not seen fit to remove him from his position. Balasiel relieved Anselain of his command because he was far too brash, arrogant, and seemed to enjoy combat a bit too much. While it is true that combat prowess is essential for a knight, Anselain's penchant for gratuitous violence put him at odds with many. Likewise, although Anselain achieved great victories for Sandoria, he also showed blatant disregard for the lives of even his own men, an extremely bad trait for a commander to possess, and Balasiel knew it. When he was relieved of his command by Balasiel, Anselain, unsurprisingly, took it very badly, leaving Sandoria in a fit of rage. Balasiel declares Anselain as the mastermind behind the attacks on the Royal Knights and tells the Dragoon to track him down before he can do any more harm. Where is he though? The Dragoon knows that Anselane will likely be seeking a place where Aplacion went in his own ventures across the Outlands, the Elshamo Island perhaps? Knowing what they now know about the fugitive knight, and knowing that their wyvern can sense strong emotions, as it did when it first formed a bond with them, the Dragoon embarks for the place where rancorous thoughts gather, and where Anselane could likely be, the Temple of Ageleth. Sending word to Rahal where they are going, the Dragoon makes haste for the temple. When their wyvern directs them to a spot in the temple, the Dragoon is approached by Anselane, now revealed to have fully succumbed to his darkness in becoming a Dark Knight. Using the power of his black magic, Anselane uses the lingering spirit attached to Aplacion's helm to recall the legendary Dragoon to the world with a corporeal form. Aplacion walks over to the Dragoon and notices their wyvern. Smiling at it, he expresses his gratitude for the Dragoon in taking up his mantle. Anselane's short patience runs out though, and he demands that Aplacion join him in exacting vengeance on Sandoria, under the impression that both men were betrayed by the kingdom they served. Aplacion then turns his attention to Anselane, a look of utter disdain and revulsion on his face. He says that he has nothing but gratitude towards his homeland, and moves to attack Anselane, realizing that he has made a colossal mistake and is no match for two Dragoons. Anselane makes to flee, but instead runs headlong into Rahal and two of his royal knights. Completely outnumbered, Anselane concedes all is lost as he sinks to his knees in defeat without even having put up a fight. Rahal has his knights take Anselane into custody, and then he sees the figure at the other end of the chamber, Aplacion. Suspecting that Anselane's spell will wear off soon, Rahal asks a pressing question of the legendary hero. Why did King Romper send him away? Finally, Aplacion reveals the truth. When Aplacion returned to the royal court following the civil war, the king thanked him sincerely for the role he played in seeing it through to a swift end. When asked if he would remain to assist in the reunification of the kingdom, Aplacion regretfully told the king that he could no longer stay in Sandoria. Taken aback by this, he demanded to know why he must see the back of one of his greatest knights after all that he had accomplished. Aplacion explained to the king that over the course of his battles in the civil war, an unholy crest had appeared on his wyvern. The crest appeared because they both killed people with no sins to answer for. Although both sides in a civil war consider themselves just, the reality is that innocents end up fighting for a cause that they do not entirely believe in. Ultimately, everyone loses whenever kin fight one another. I believe dragons teach us the folly of our ways, is how Aplacion summarized it best. Knowing that if he did not tend to the unholy crest it would grow and run the risk of him falling to evil, Aplacion knew that he had to spend what he thought would take the rest of his life away from others, to live in peaceful solitude. To do this, he asked for one final favor from his king, to have his self-imposed exile presented as death in the line of duty. Aplacion knew that if people knew he still lived, he would be hounded by assassins for the remainder of his life. People needed to think he was dead for this to work. The king was distraught by this revelation. The price for quelling the civil war was to lose his greatest asset. No, one of his closest friends. Still, the king agreed to help Aplacion vanish in accordance with what was essentially his final wish. After traversing the Outlands, Aplacion ventured far north to the snowy peaks of the Ologran Range. Eventually, the unholy crest on his wyvern faded away, but by then he was far too old to return to civilization, so he released his wyvern into the world and raised a younger one until he finally passed away. The Dragoon wonders to themselves whether one of Aplacion's two wyverns is the parent of their own. Their train of thought is cut by Aplacion asking for a moment with their wyvern though. Sensing his brief time back in the world is coming to an end, Aplacion affectionately pets the Dragoon's wyvern, expressing his wish for them to grow strong as he himself fades away from the world for the last time. The last Dragoon, in spirit and in legacy, has finally been laid to rest. Inspired by his example and image, the Dragoon dons a new suit of armor paying homage to Aplacion. The Dragoon's further adventures with their wyvern take them to faraway places where they make some remarkable discoveries. While exploring the Empire of Artagan, they come across Professor Clavat Chanoix, Upon hearing the zoologist's surname, the Dragoon cannot help but wonder if he is a descendant of a Placian's line. The professor is certainly no knight, but he does have an affinity for the natural world and an interest in the order it maintains. After having an interesting adventure with the professor and his assistant, he gives the Dragoon a curious gorget, likely a family treasure that might have belonged to a very famous relative. The Dragoon cannot know for certain, but it does please them that a Placian's line could be survived by some likewise noble people. Their adventures in the Shadowrain era introduce the Dragoon to a curious young woman called Arahat, a woman who lives in isolation at the tip of the Grauberg mountain range. Arahat is revealed to actually be a worm of incredible power, whose magic ability is so powerful she can take on the appearance of a person to easily blend in with others. Noticing that she does not have a crest on her dragon form, the Dragoon asks why she remains on the mountain. As it transpires, Arahat was simply fond of a certain knight and his displays of valor, so she decided to establish her eyrie on the mountain and defend it in his name, even after he passed away. The knight, in lieu of a spiritual link a Dragoon would normally have, opted to pay Arahat tribute in the form of appeasing her, odd tastes. Eventually, the Dragoon ventures far north and in the process stumbles across some of the locations a Placian may have himself resided as he cleared the unholy crest from his wyvern. As they look out across the mountain range from atop the Bearclaw pinnacle, they remember that they carry a Placian's legacy now, to have the world believe in dragons again. Dragoons and their dragons reflect one another. Both have the potential for light and darkness in them, and it is down to them both to keep the other on a righteous path. Their task will be difficult, but with this being the age of adventurers, those unbound by rigid tradition, the potential for the earnest return of the Dragoons of old is well alive.